Hey y'all, Melissa here with you today, and today's project is based on a free pattern by my friend Christy from Love You Sew. This is called the Kelly Waist Bag pattern, and I have a link below of where you can go to get this pattern from Christy, and then I'm going to be showing you in this video how to sew it up. This pattern comes with instructions to put on a screw-on stud, has a flap with a hole where the stud just gets poked through to hold the bag closed, and then inside it's got a little pocket just so you put things in there. It doesn't have a zipper or closure or anything on the pocket. Pretty simple interior, one interior with the exception of that pocket, and then on the back it has this belt guide so that you can string it through your belt and you can wear this and be hands-free and carrying your essentials. So head over to Christy's site at that link below to get the pattern, and then meet me back here to sew it up. All right, I've got all my supplies here. First, I've used the pattern to cut out all the pieces of leather that I'm going to need to construct it. I'm going to be using these Wonder clips, which I have linked below in case you're wondering where I got them. You want to use these instead of pins because the pins will leave holes in the leather. I have this leather punch, and I will have a link to a similar one below, but this one basically has some tips that I will use to punch holes in the leather. We're actually going to be doing that first. And I have this screw-on stud that we're going to be using as the closure, linked below as well. I'm using a mallet and a cutting board, and then of course I have my scissors. These are going to be to punch the holes in the leather and so that I can put on the screw stud and so that it'll have a hole to go through on the flap. So we're actually going to do that first so I can have that done and set aside. So the flap here is going to have a hole punched into it right there. And I'm going to be using the bigger of my tips for this one because this needs to be bigger. And all I need to do is put my leather on the cutting board. And this is to protect your surfaces, just like when you're cutting things with a knife, because this is going to cut a hole. And I want to center my hole over that marking. All right, if it doesn't go all the way through, like this didn't, you can hammer again. That should have gotten, there we go, that last little bit of leather. So you can see now I've got a hole in my leather, and that's where the stud is going to be poked through to close the bag. And then once I'm done punching the hole, I actually noticed, because I tried this earlier to make sure that I had the right size for the stud, it actually worked a little better if I used my punch and just kind of poked around in the hole to widen it a little bit. It needs to be stretched out just a teeny bit for this stud to slide through easily. And then I can take the tip off, and I'm going to switch to the other side of the tip here, the other size. And I determined these sizes. There were a few that came with my punch. I determined these sizes by actually getting out the stud and seeing like the largest size that I had, would I be able to poke the stud through. And like I said, with a little bit of stretching, it does go through. And then to determine the hole for the other side, I went ahead and unscrewed the two halves of the stud and went to see which one did I have that would just barely be bigger than the screw part of the stud. So that's this size. And that end is going to get put on. You can see this is the front and back panels. The stud placement is on the front panel. So I've marked that, and I'm going to punch that in. And there we go. I've got a hole for it. And now I can take the screw stud, put the screw from the back, and screw on the stud part on the front. And then I'm going to set this aside because I don't need this right now, because the actual first step in the pattern is going to be to do the pockets. The pieces for the pocket are what I want first, and my pocket I went ahead and cut out of a little bit of suede that I had left over from a different pattern. So the instructions are to align the smaller piece, the pocket front with the pocket back, and then stitch around the sides of these. So that is what I am going to do. Now, I already have my machine set up to sew leather, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about what I did. I put in a leather needle, I lengthened the stitch, and I'm using heavy duty thread. But if you want more details and specific tips about sewing and working with leather, I have another video that I'll link below and at the end so that you can go check that out. Because leather can often be tricky at the very beginning of a seam, I like to start by hand cranking to make sure that the leather is feeding and that I'm getting correct stitches. And then here, I'm gonna have issues until I've got both layers of leather under the needle. So I'm gonna have to stop and pick up the presser foot several times. So hand cranking just makes more sense here. Once I've got both layers under the presser foot, then it's easier to start stitching. And anytime it stops feeding, I kind of give it a little tug in the back to help it. Alright, here is my pocket, and you can see that my suede kind of stretched as I was sewing. That's pretty common with suede, and actually I'll go square off the top again. It's just one of those things with an industrial machine, it's easier to control, or if you want to hand stitch it, you can. It's a pocket, I'm not going to stress too much over it, but that's a thing to be aware of if that's something that would stress you out. So the next thing on the list is to go ahead and prepare the back panel. So here's my back panel. I have marked this with chalk, and you can see the markings here. There's the belt guide placement, and here's my belt guide, and you're supposed to match up the centers and then put it on that lower line, and we're going to stitch right across there. Once again, I'm going to start by hand cranking just until I get the fabric, both layers, fully under that presser foot. And if your presser foot starts jumping up like that, a little bit of pressure on the front can help it. Pattern also calls for a second line of stitching right next to your first line. And then I need to repeat that on the other side of the belt guide. Okay, it's starting to shred my thread. You can see that there. It sometimes happens with leather and leather needles. Even when you're using the right size, like sometimes machines that are not made for leather just do not like working with it. What I do when that happens is go back and rethread. I do try to go back one stitch before I continue so that I've got an overlap. Alright, one more line of stitching to go for this belt guide. Okay, and here is what the back panel with the belt guide on it looks like. So, the next thing that you are supposed to do is stitch in the pockets, and those go on the inside. So let's trim threads from first lines of stitching. All right, making sure those center marks are aligned. I'm going to stitch across the top here. Once the pocket is stitched onto the back part of the pattern, then it is time to sew on the flap, which is going to go here. So we need to match up those center lines, and then the edge of the flap should go with the edge of the marked line. And then I'm going to stick it in, and this is going to be the most difficult seam to sew on this whole project because I'm going through 3 layers of leather. I just hit the suede, so I'm going to hand crank again for a second here until the machine gets the hang of the 3 layers. And the presser foot is evened out. All right, I've got the flap sewn on. I'm going to trim those threads. And you can see where the machine was really struggling here, where I first got on to the suede and those 3 layers of leather. Okay, it's time for clips because we're going to finish attaching the last 2 pieces, which is the gusset and the front flap. So first we're going to want to attach the gusset right sides together with the back. Okay, and the pattern suggests that you use something to help guide these corners of the gusset under the sewing machine. So she suggests a stiletto or an awl. I'm going to be using, this is my point turner tool, because you can really get it in there where you wouldn't want to put your finger because you don't want to sew through your finger. You can see my thread is starting to shred again, so I'm going to go ahead and rethread here. Alright, here is the gusset attached to that side, and now we have to attach it to the front side as well. Let's sew this last seam. Alright y'all, there is my bag sewn. So I'm trimming off those threads. By the way, if your machine won't pull threads to the back and knot them and finish them like mine was doing, you're going to want to absolutely finish these before you continue on. Do that by pulling them both sides of the thread to the same side and knotting it before you cut threads off. But let's turn this right side out now. There we go. There is my waist bag. So your belt would go through here, and there's actually instructions in the pattern for how to make yourself a little belt to go on. I prefer to just put this on an existing belt, so that's why I didn't make one. But this is what the Kelly waist bag looks like when it's finished.